Hi, good afternoon, home language. It is week 12, the 28th of October. It's about 4:25, and I'm greeting you from glorious Port Elizabeth. Beautiful weather. They seem to suggest there's going to be cold weather coming through for tomorrow, but for the moment we are enjoying a beautiful summer's day. Yeah. So I'm hoping just the same in your part of the world. I think there's been a bit of a heat wave in Johannesburg, I've heard, in the Eastern Cape, and I think even the Cape, but we're having a bit of cooler weather, I think, as we're normally about 21 or 22. Our hot weather only comes in about February. So I'm hoping that you're all being safe and that lockdown and is not sort of impacting on your world, and that you're all observing all the sanitization, the mask wearing, social distancing, hand washing, as you should be doing. So let me get to tonight's or this afternoon's class learning event, and let me just share my screen with you. Collect my, wonder where it is. There we go. I've got it right. I'm going to have to read it all the way up there. Okay, started it back to front. Let's go for this. And yes, we are in week 12, and we're looking at assessments. Still part of language in practice for home language. Creating tests and assessment rubrics. And I know we've done this ad infinitum. You've been putting them into practice in your assignments. You've been doing them in your mini assignments. So I think you've been becoming quite clued up with marking guides, assessment rubrics, checklists, and so on. So I'm going to concentrate more on a more theoretical side to creating tests and what assessments are all about. And I'm going to continue with this, looking at more pedagogical research next week, theories behind assessment. A lot of this comes from CAPS documents, so we're going to just try and put a bit of a structure and a framework for when we design tests and what our tests might say or not say about student learning. All right. As usual, my spreadsheet in week 12, we can see there's a whole frame of black here, but there's little bubbles of red emerging still, it seems. Okay. Yes, the assignment 3, only 14 of the 21 FETs have submitted. I'm not too sure why the 7 have not submitted. And for SPs, 21 of the 33. So there's quite a big gap, and possibly some are still going to submit, or maybe some of you have going for second opportunities or third opportunities. I'm not too sure. If it is an issue, please get back to me. Also, the week 10, 25 of the 33 submitted the online tracking, 15 of the 21, but higher than last week. And so far, there's only 3 for FET and 6 for SP for the online tracking. We've got till Friday night to finish that. Please be aware that these marks count towards your your participation mark of 10%. So I think it's quite a nice, easy way to get a nice big 80 or 90% if you do these consistently. Okay, there we go. Right, we're on to Unit 3. You can see we've done the first 2 sections of Unit 3. Looked last week at suitable text for CL activities. This week we're looking at creating tests and assessment rubrics, sort of. Ferreira, we've looked at Ferreira's chapter, but those are the pages in Ferreira. But I've basically spent a lot of the theory comes from Colleen, chapter 15, the final chapter in Colleen, a lovely solid chapter on assessment. I still really recommend this book. It's really relevant to the CAPS document, and theoretically and practically, it's really a great text to have. And then we'll get to the rest of the knowledge next week. It's going to be a Zoom presentation and a bit about feedback, I think, about assignment 3 with the setting of exams for these courses. Okay, so you might say, well, why are learners assessed? Why are you assessed? Why am I assessed? Why have I been assessed? All right. And if you look at the CAPS document, the National Protocol for Assessment for Grades R to 12, there are 3 sections they say about assessment here, is that it provides a chance for you to get evidence of student performance, and which you can record and then report on. So this is this formal evidence collecting through your assessments. It's for you to allocate marks, as we all do. They can be translated into achievement levels from 1 to 7. For 1, not having achieved right up for number 7. where you have your 82, 90 to 100%. And then to determine which students are ready to progress to the next grade. So that's quite important as well. With this year, I think most students will just automatically progress. Not sure they've met anywhere near the learning outcomes they should have, and those are going to be issues for teachers next year to try and catch up on. So this is from the CAPS document, the codes and percentages for recording and reporting for teachers. There are the 7 levels, from outstanding achievement to at 7 to number 1, 0 to 29%, which you have not achieved the learning outcomes. And Bart gets very excited if he gets a D-, because that means he has passed. I don't know how many students feel happy with a D or an E. You had to get a C or a D to pass. So it was 60% was the pass, and students all wanted 90 to 100% most of the time. So the excitement of getting a pass is great. I think it's great. 50% is fine. It's a pass. Right. So why our learners assess? They also serve other purposes besides recording, reporting, and so on. It gives indicators of what they can do and what they know. In terms of that LO. So you can see that they've achieved that learning outcome or they have not. It's to evaluate their progress in terms of what their knowledge is, what their gaps in their learning is, so you can actually address those issues. It's to give them feedback, to say, look, you haven't really understood how to change this into indirect speech. You need to go over that again. You can do the tag to give them their feedback. So tell them something you like. Ask a question, give a suggestion, however you want to give your feedback. And then you also need to have a reporting basis on which parents will know the format you're going to use to let parents know how their children have actually, what they've done at school. And there's Melinda, very happy with all her high grades there. And also to help you identify ways that you can improve on your teaching, as if they're all not been able to do something, you maybe have to go and look at how you can actually help them to achieve those goals. That's all the big tick as a teacher. Also, the right assessment can extend learner understanding. So if you're going to get multiple choice questions and short answers, I don't know if that's always appropriate, and I don't know if it's going to actually extend their learning. If you're writing essays, can't get the multiple choice, or closed exercises to write paragraphs, not going to work. It also encourages learners to put more effort into their learning, if that's appropriate, the assessment. It helps you to diagnose specific learner difficulties. If you give them a closed exercise to write essays, you're not going to be able to diagnose very much in terms of sentence structure and cohesion and coherence. So you have to have the right type of assessment for that. Once you see why they are lost, they are unsure, they're excluded, and all their questions, then you can go and see what you can actually do to help them to answer those questions. To identify barriers. Why are they always sleeping in your class? Or why don't they like reading? So to work with those kind of issues in your class. And then for you to determine what you need to revise or reteach based on that assessment. What was going on? When did this happen? How can I do this? What should I revise? What should I go over again? Because they're going to make the same mistakes again. So that's why tests that are appropriate are very, very important. So a purposeful assessment will be an appropriate assessment. It's not going to be a multiple choice type question for an essay, right? If it's a reading text, you're not going to give them something they're listening to. So you've got to make sure that the kind of text, if it's something visual literacy, you don't give them something that's just writing. Okay, so you have to look for the right kind of materials. And also minimize factors that could cause you to misinterpret their responses. So you give them a multiple choice question for an essay and they get 100%, and you think, oh, my students can all write so well, they get 100%, all of them. That's some misleading information. You've used inappropriate tests for that. So make sure that you are correctly assessing what they really do know. It will only be a reliable assessment and trustworthy if you do it properly, and then you can use this information to make decisions about how you teach something. When you know they have adequately captured the idea of writing an introduction or referencing, If they can't reference or put in text referencing, you know you have to go over that section again. And that's why appropriate assessment allows you to look at results, to plan, to audit, to analyze, to measure, to reflect, to change your goals. But if it's inappropriate, none of those will work. I'm going to differentiate now quickly between formal and informal assessment, and then summative and formative assessment as well. So let's quickly look at formal assessment. This is your pre-planned, systematic, that is measured, so you can see if they've mastered their learning outcomes. That type of end-of-year formal test type of assessment. This is normally a substantial assignment task, whether it be assignment or a test, and official marks will now be the result of this. They get 63, that'll become their mark. CAPS lays out what kind of tasks you need, and we're going to have a look at that as well for your assessment. This test will form, or this exam, or this oral will form part of the yearly assessment plan. It'll occur at a predetermined time, end of term 1, 2, 3, 4. There'll be a detailed marking guide on how you're going to mark the assignment, or the essay, or the test, and you're going to give feedback afterwards to your students. You're going to go over that exam with them. Yes, they must be told beforehand that there will be a test or an exam. Why? Because they have to prepare for it. You might think with English they can just come and write. No, they can't. You must prepare them for it and give them all the information about the transactional, the writing, the poetry, whatever is needed. So you have your high-stake tests, which are your exams. They're used for grading, for progress reports. And you have your low-stakes ones, which are your informal type of observation type tests, which also assessments, which are important to you, but you can also see problems when you use those kind of assessments. And you're going to give them proper feedback. Here's this cartoon where he says, I don't really like this feedback. It's not very specific for my formative assessment, saying just bad dog. You say just bad writer, you're not giving them any kind of suggestion or help on how to improve. Just remember that. So an informal assessment on the other side is something that has no pressure in it, okay? Can occur at any time during the lesson. They don't even have to be aware that they are being assessed. They don't always have to do something, write an essay, write a paragraph, write a summary. They can just be discussing, and you can just be observing them and be assessing what is actually happening there. You don't have to keep a record of it, but you can, because it might help you to plan an intervention and to help you reflect on your teaching by this discussion that was happening in the class. These are very important informal forms of assessment. When they say, I sort of understand this, then you start thinking about how can you really make them understand. Well, I totally understand it. You wonder, why did they really understand that concept? Or why did they not understand anything? So you need to plan your interventions based on these reflections of your teaching. Okay, we're going back to the, now I've put the wrong slide in here. I've put the file, but I've got the, I'm going to put this in separately in on ECI as the right slides for the home language FET. It's also based on the assessment grades for R212, and it's also in the CAPS document. I think the page is about 75 in the home language one. Right, so as teachers, you must be aware that there's a combination of formative and summative assessment according to CAPS. And this differs per grade. Okay, this you know now is the first additional language. I will give you the home language ones as well separately. So you've got the formal assessment, which is your SBA, school-based assessment, which is 25%, made up of 2 tests, 7 tasks, and 1 examination at mid-year for grades 10 to 11. And then you've got your more formal assessments, which are your summative towards the end of the year, your paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, as well as your oral assessment. Same goes for grade 12. You've got your SBA, same kind of tasks that they've got to do during the year for counts 25% of their mark. The end of the year exam, which is 75% made up of 62, their paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, and 12.5, their oral exam. For the SP home language, I'll also put that up on ECI. Again, it is 40% for formal and 60% for summative, and also set 10 tasks for SBA, and then the paper 2 and 3 as your written exam, and then you have your oral as well as paper 1. For grade 9, again, 40% and 60%, but here you also have a paper 4, which is a response to literature. So you've got paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, and paper 4. I'll also give you the correct page references for that. So formative and summative assessments, how do they differ? Formative is during the course of instruction, all right? It goes on, it's your SBA type, standardized school assessments, helps you to identify gaps in a student's learning, what the content knowledge gaps are, what they do understand, how can I close those gaps, what opportunities can I use this information, what diagnostic feedback can I give my students to help them to understand their limitations of what they have learned, what formative can I give them feedback to help them to improve on what they are learning, and how can I amend my instruction, my reteaching, by giving more opportunities to practice. So what can I do in that formative assessment process? And most of that is remediation. It's to revise and make better. This is what the benefit is of making this diagnostic assessment. It's going to help you to become a better teacher. Summative, on the other hand, is at the end of the course, write your exams, your final exams. You're trying to make conclusions about what the students' knowledge and their understanding and their skills are. The cartoon here says, all right, let's see how much you remember. That's your mathematics exam. How much do they remember? Bloom's taxonomy, remember, that's very low. So what can they create? What can they analyze? It's also important. And this is at the end of the course, so there's not much chance for them to improve and to get a better result. So this is the downfall of summative, is that there's no chance for a student to redo unless they redo the standard or the grade. That's its limited value of that, but you do assess how much they really do know. So formative is to improve their learning, and this happens throughout the year. Summative is to grade them, and so normally the promotion marks is based on that. I quite like this cartoon. You've got the different layers going up the ladder. Right at the bottom, you've got formative, more formative, more formative. So it's happening continuously throughout the year until you eventually get to the final exam, which is just summative. You won't get them as summative all the time, because formative is going to enable you to actually develop them through continuous assessment, find out the gaps, improve on learning, make sure they understand everything. Right, these are broad CAPS assessment requirements from the CAPS document, home language. You're required to gather valid and reliable information on an ongoing basis from your students, not once off, it's continuous, it's essays all the time. And to have clearly defined criteria on how you're going to grade and make judgments about their work. You're going to use a variety of methods, tools, techniques, contexts, reading, visual, literature, writing, listening, ways to assess their learning of English. Then you're going to record those findings so that you can progress their progress. You can track their progress. There you are. There's your spreadsheet, your Excel spreadsheet, where you've got all your students' names, the marks, so you can see what's happening with each of the students with their results. And then you're going to report on each learner's progress in a specified format. The report card, which goes out to guardians, moms and dads, for them to read about the good or the bad results of their child. So I'm going to quickly at assessment reliability. What is a reliable assessment? If you don't test appropriately, it becomes an unreliable assessment. And Colleen describes 8 items which makes an assessment reliable. I'm going to go through these quite quickly. So number 1 is, how many items are you testing? If you have a small number of items, you've got 3 multiple choice, it's not going to be very reliable. They're short, there's not testing a great deal, so you've now got an unreliable assessment. So you can't base any kind of meaning on this. If you're just using a small, you're just testing about indirect speech, it's quite unreliable. You can't make statements about their ability and their proficiency levels if you're just testing on one thing. As you increase your number of items, you get a better sample of what their knowledge is and their understanding, and you get a greater range of outcomes that you are testing. So that's why the language exam with the reading, the comprehension, the grammar is a better overall reflection of what the student's ability is. So the longer the test is, you're also reducing chance factors when they make simple mistakes. If they're a short test and they make one simple mistake, it might really bring their marks down. With the longer tests, make one little mistake, it's not really going to factor in. But if it's too long, it can also cause reduced reliability because of fatigue. They get exhausted. So if you're in a 3 or 4 hour exam, you might be feeling like this, pretty tired. Okay, and that might not make you a very, very good person to be examined, especially if you're doing 2 of those long exams in the same day. The second thing that Colleen speaks about is the difficulty of the items. How difficult are the questions that you're asking? Again, think of Bloom's taxonomy. The lower levels are the remember and understand, going right up to the create, evaluate, judge, which are the higher ones. If you give in all the higher order questions, the paper can become quite difficult. So if you limit the opportunities to demonstrate what they have learned with all your difficult questions, it's not a reliable paper either. And you might discourage your students not to want to progress any further in your paper. If it's too easy, you also give them limited time to really show what their knowledge and understanding is. So too easy is also a problem. So have a range of questions, easy ones to encourage them, especially at the beginning, the difficult ones to challenge them to you, and that normally comes at the end of the paper. So you have the good and bad. So they say put the more difficult questions at the end of the paper, otherwise students might give up. But I think it's a good idea because if you look at this little diagram, often if you put the difficult questions at the end, get your students to read the difficult questions at the end, and then while they're busy writing the easy questions or the easier, they'll be still thinking about that question and their brain will be working, and then the ideas will come while they're busy writing. So when they get to the question at the end, they've got some idea of how to answer it because their brain is working on it. Okay. Number 3, test item discrimination. So if all the students understand the work, they should answer correctly. All right, does that make sense? If they understand the work, they shouldn't get them all wrong, right? If they don't understand the work, think especially maths, they should answer incorrectly. All right. Right, okay. So questions that do not discriminate well between learners who have different levels of understanding reduce the test reliability. So if you've got a very bright student that's getting everything wrong, and a student with very low understanding is getting everything right, there's something wrong with the way you're asking those questions, and you need to go and check that. Here's number 4, guessing. Okay. If there's lots of place for guessing, like multiple choice, they can just randomly, and I've seen students finish an exam paper in 1 minute, 30 questions, because they just randomly select, and sometimes they pass as well. Less reliable. True false questions are also less reliable. Interesting. Wording and instructions. If students do not understand what they are required to do, that's why I have to read your instructions in your assignment 3, so I can understand what I must do if I were answering your paper. So if your wording is confused, or you're missing information, or not giving enough details, your test results will also be unreliable because they won't actually understand what they should be doing, even if they read carefully. Right, what about the test environment? If it's too noisy, or too hot, or too cold, or too windy, or too many students in it, or too many people that are sniffing or sneezing, it might hinder their ability to display learning and might reduce the reliability of the test. What about how you, as the marker, interpret the answers? How objective or subjective are you? That's interesting, because sometimes your own subjectivity, because you might not like someone, might influence the way you mark the paper, positively or negatively. So if it's multiple choice questions, will need very little interpretation, so it's quite an objective way to mark, whereas an essay will require high levels of interpretation of that paper, which might make you more subjective. So if you just look at subjective here, it means that you are basing everything on your personal opinion, your judgment, your feelings, and your point of view. Whereas for objective, you're looking at the facts, you're looking at observations, you're looking at measurements, so you can be more objective. However, I feel if you've got a proper marking guide and a very accurate rubric, you cut out this subjectivity because you can rate them on those different criteria within your rubric or in your marking guides. That really helps become a more reliable test as well. Number 8, the last one, clarity and completeness of marking guides. Your rubrics, your marking guides are so important for any exam or test that you set. Without this comprehensive marking guide, there's no marking consistency, even if you're the only marker. If there are more, it becomes more problematic because you might mark A's work like this and B's work like that. That's why you need a tight rubric or marking guides that you don't mark something right in one paper and something wrong in the other paper. So how can we benchmark learner performance? Caneen also looks at norm referenced assessment, criterion referenced assessment, and then standard referenced assessments. There are 3 different kinds. With the norm assessment, I'm measuring the student against the people in the class. So this is Sally, I'm measuring her against the other students in the class. So I'm comparing individual learners with the performance of others. And then I rank them relative to that performance average in the class. So I give them the same test, I standardize it, I mark it in the same way, I work out the average, and then based on their marks, I place them from number 1 to number 50 in terms of that. That's the ranking part. The limitation of this approach is that when I rank them, I'm not really paying attention. What did they know and what did they not know? So if they're first, what did they really know? If they came last, what did they really not know? So I'm not ranking them according to what they know or what they do not know. I use a criterion reference. Now we've got Sally again, and I'm measuring her against, not against her fellow peers, but against the criteria for the assessment. So she should get to 10 and she's only got to 9.5 in terms of the criteria. I'm not looking at other students when I mark her work. So I'm only looking at her performance against my criteria. It looks if she has or she hasn't met the criteria. I've marked the work in a standardized way and I've used a checklist. She must meet a minimum criteria to pass. So I might say, although she's got 9.5, she must get 5 to pass. All right. This is difficulty because she only has to meet that minimum criteria. And I'm going to categorize it in this bipolar way, and I've not really found out what does she know and what doesn't she know. I'm disguising important facts. Why did she get a 5 or why did she get a 9.5? So it does not state what learners have learned or what they have to learn. The standards reference assessment is very much like CAPS, but we'll look at that now. It gives a detailed description of various levels of achievement. So I've got my criteria, but within each criteria, I've got about 5 levels. So there might be 10 criteria with 5 levels, and I get certain levels in each of those criteria. So there's a range of achievement levels, and this is quite nice. This will motivate me as a student to go for excellence, because I might get a 5 out of 5 for criteria number 7. I've got a 2 for criteria 3, but I can see I can improve that. So it gives me more motivation to improve. With this kind of test administration, you can also allow for students with special needs, like giving them more time, or a scribe if they can't write nicely. So you can actually use that as well in this kind of assessment. You judge the performance by comparing how the student did with the details of the standard, not against peers and not against criterion. So in this whole continuum, they will be automatically placed where they have achieved. So this is the approach that compares their performance to the standards rather than to specific criteria or to other students. But it is performance-based. So let's look at CAPS again. So it does not describe ours as standards. It says you have to record and report learners' achievement and similarities with the standards reference assessment. And we've got 7 levels and they are not placed according to rank. So it's quite close to the standards reference assessment way, because the achievements are reported on a scale. There they are. They're the 7 levels. So it is more, but there's not much of a continuum within that. There's no breakdown within the 7. So where did they actually fall within that, and why did they get that mark? Or why did they get the 1? What was the actual grade? So what different assessments measure? There is your criterion. Will measure the student not against other scores. They're not affected by the performance of the others. With a normative one, they can actually achieve that standard, but they might not reach the criteria measured standard. So they might be all on the left. They've achieved the norm reference measures against their peers, with their peers, but they haven't actually gained the criteria. They haven't met those criteria either. So there is a bit of discrepancy there. This is a standards-based one, very much like the CAPS, where you have your 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you are rated on that scale, and you can see where you can actually progress or not progress within that. And that's the closest one to CAPS. Quickly about the marking process, because I know you as teachers love marking. You have to be systematic and quite intelligent to mark, and you have to work with a marking guide always, so that you can have inter-rater reliability. If you've got 5 people rating, you should all get 10 out of 10, get the same scores all the time. So also, first of all, clarify what you're going to assess. Okay, otherwise it's going to be so terrible marking something if you don't know exactly what you're going to assess. Review some of the scripts to make sure that your marking guide has covered all the different aspects. That's why it's a very good idea to have a marking meeting, this whole team of you, so you can thrash out interpretations, and you can add to your memo, take away from your memo as well. Mark blind, that means a good idea not to mark someone's work knowing their name. That's why it's a very good idea when you first start teaching that we actually don't look at the names, we just mark, and that makes you more objective. Watch your marking guide, use it, refer to it all the time. Develop a marking guide that focuses on the particular areas you want to assess. Often when I'm marking assignment, I see that I haven't put in a section, say, for referencing, and that's quite important, so I can go back and I can add that to my assessment list. All students know they should reference. Give them feedback. That's why we have to try and give you quite a long summative assessment feedback, so you know why you got your mark. And it's not something like 6 out of 10 could do better. That is not a meaningful enough feedback. So you must make your comments clear and concise, focused, and point out that what needs to be demonstrated. Mark one section at a time. So mark section A and do all the section A's, because you are consistent in your marking, and you're not going to mark something right or wrong. You will soon see that you develop a pattern and it's easier. And if you've got a lot of students, I've got about 90, monitor your marking so that you make sure you are applying those criteria consistently. Okay, there you go. So assessments, yes, part of our life and part of your life for a long time, and you don't be accused of being unfair in your marking. That's why you need marking guides. You have to be consistent. You've got to be upfront. You've got to give feedback. If your student comes and says to you, why did I get that mark? You've got to be able to tell the student why you got that mark. I was just saying in my last lecture, in all my life, no one has ever come and said to me, Marcel, gee, was because you gave me too many marks here. I really don't deserve that A. I should actually only get a D. I've only been accused of not giving enough marks, and that's quite weird, I think, that students always seem to feel that we have not given them the marks that they deserve. But if you've got an accurate and fair assessment guide, you can justify that mark in a very objective way. Okay, so this is the last slide. Parents will come and see you and they'll say, we're concerned about our marks. What happened there? What happened to Johnny? What happened to Ayanda's marks? And you've got to be able to, as a teacher, tell them. And then you can say to them, well, what grade do you think your child should have got if you look at what they did? And you'll see they'll sort of with big eyes and sort of say that your marking was very fair. At the end of the day, we want all our students to be successful. So that means it's really that we work together, that we show them what our expectations are. We go over marking rubrics, we go over what we want them to do. So nothing is a surprise to them. We practice from our formative assessment, things that they should be able to do. So when they go into the exam, yes, they can pass quite happily because they really know what they should be doing throughout the year. So that's good night to me, good afternoon or good evening at this time. I hope you all have a good week. I hope you're all surviving. I know many of you have got great assignments and tasks that you're busy with. So just hang in there. This too shall pass. And I'll chat to you next week on Zoom. Any problems or concerns, just email me. So enjoy your evening and we chat soon. Bye.